Welcome into Three True Values. This week, we have plenty to discuss. We are very close to Selection Sunday. We have conference tournament action happening all across the country. We have plenty of bids already punched into the NCAA tournament. And so it is time to start talking about the bubble in depth. We've got plenty that will go into this. There are teams that are on the right side, teams that are on the wrong side, teams that have games left to play, teams that are already out of their conference tournaments and cannot add anything to their resume, but they also cannot hurt the resume any further. So we're going to break down all of those teams, who stands where, what they need to reach the NCAA tournament field. Of course, we've got the 37 at-large spots. Those final ones are still up for grabs. So that will come in the second segment. Here in the first segment, though, we are going to kind of preface the bubble conversation with a discussion on Memphis and Gonzaga. And I think that Memphis and Gonzaga are really going to serve as a test case for what we see throughout the field. You can look at the top seeds and compare it to what we see with Memphis and Gonzaga. You can look at the bubble and compare it to those two teams. It's going to be really interesting and a pretty unique situation that we find ourselves in. We'll discuss that here in the first segment. And then, as promised, we will not do a Games of the Week segment in the final slot there. Instead, we're going to update you on where the top seeds stand. Not a lot of movement, but there is one key piece of movement that we will detail for you. So, as we go ahead and get things started, we have to talk about Gonzaga and Memphis, two teams that will probably land somewhere between the 5 seed line and the 8 seed line as currently formulated right now. Gonzaga, of course, already the West Coast Conference champions. They knock off St. Mary's, who beat them twice in the regular season. The Zags have locked themselves into the field. Of course, that was never really an issue. They were always within the projected bracket. But what's interesting about their resume and where it differs from so many across college basketball right now is that Gonzaga dominates in all of the predictive metrics. All of these analytic computer models love Gonzaga. If you look at them in the net, they're currently number 8. You look at them at KenPom, 10th. Bart Torvik, they are 9th. So why are we talking about them in this conversation of potential 5 or 6 seed? Some people believe they're as low as an 8 seed. What is it about their resume that's holding them back? Well, it's the paper resume. It's the quadrant system. It's the lack of quad 1 wins that they picked up throughout the majority of the season. It's the fact that in wins above bubble, which of course replaces strength of record, they are 41st, which would then place them closer to the bubble than it would where those predictive metrics have them in the top 10. So there's such a large gap between those two, with Gonzaga having plenty of case to be among the top end of college basketball in one category that we look at, but in the other one, they don't look like they're one of the top teams at all. So which one is the selection committee going to value over the other one? And that's where Memphis comes into play, why they're such an important indicator of what this selection committee values and how the rest of the field should look. Because if we see all of the teams that have great predictive numbers, who are near the top of the country in those metrics, if they all end up on higher seed lines, or in the case of the bubble, they end up in the field, then we know that is what this committee looks at and views as important. Conversely, though, when we look at Memphis, they do not have the computer numbers. If you look at them in the net, currently 47th, 49th in KenPom, and 59th at Bart Torvik. So those are bubble or on the wrong side of things if we're looking at them just on their own. But in wins above bubble, they are 26th. And if you look at the quadrant system, they are among the top teams in the country in quad 1 wins, as well as their quad 1 record. They performed very well through the non-conference. They picked up a lot of big resume building wins before reaching AAC play. Now, the committee chair this year, Bubba Cunningham from North Carolina, he had a meeting yesterday, that being Wednesday, where he kind of broke down where things stand, what this committee is looking at, what they value, and how the process will unfold over the next several days. And it gave a couple of key indicators on where things stand between Gonzaga and Memphis. He suggested that what benefits Gonzaga most, and this of course can be extrapolated from the data, did not require his input, but he is publicly discussing it, is that Gonzaga beat a lot of teams by a lot of points. When they went through the West Coast Conference, they were blowing out the teams that are quad 3, quad 4 opportunities, winning those games by 15 to 20 points every time. Memphis, on the other hand, won a lot of their quad 3 and quad 4 games by just somewhere between 2 to 10 points. And so the gap in those predictive measures is judging Gonzaga favorably because it's saying that the translation between a 20-point win against a bad team then brings them into contention to win by those 2 to 10 points against good teams. On the other hand, it's saying that Memphis, who is only beating those bad teams by that lesser range, would in turn lose if they faced higher level of competition. The problem is, in reality, on the court, that is not what has played out. In reality, Gonzaga has struggled more in those games, and Memphis has played extremely well in those games. But we haven't seen Memphis play in any of those games over the past few months. So, how do you judge that? It's going to be very difficult for the committee to separate what these two teams are. Gonzaga, whose numbers are higher than where they should land, Memphis's, who are lower than where they should land. And so that's why you take this holistic approach. That's why we talk about it not just being the computer numbers. It's not just the resume on paper. You have to take into account the eye test as well. You have to bring those three things together to fill out your final bracket. But the reason that this extends beyond just these two teams, the reason that it impacts the entire NCAA tournament field, is because it's a philosophical debate that we're having about the way that the bracket should be constructed when we talk about where these two teams should be seated. And so if Gonzaga lands on that 6 seed line, but then we look at the bubble and a team like Utah State, like North Carolina, like even Oklahoma, even though they dropped a bit in these recently. If those teams end up on the wrong side of the bubble versus a team like, say, Indiana, or perhaps even some of the lower ranked teams in this analytic model, the Wake Forests, the Colorado States, if that were to happen, if those teams lose out to a team that is more than 20 spots lower in the computer metrics, while Gonzaga gets the benefit, there's going to be serious questions about what this selection committee is actually looking at, because it would be very inconsistent of them to take those two different approaches in two different areas of the bracket. And so I think you will know, based off of where those two teams land, what the bubble will look like. Now, of course, the way that it's revealed, we might even find out the bubble before then. But the point is, they will be judged on the consistency of their decision in Gonzaga and Memphis' seeding across the rest of the field. That is how we will determine if this selection committee did a good job, if they followed their principles. It applies to the top of the bracket as well. You've got this separation here, where Texas Tech is 7th across all of the predictive metrics. Kentucky, 12th, 11th, and 16th. Iowa State, 9th, and 8th. You've got Texas A&M, 17th, 17th, 24th. St. John's, 16th, 15th, and 22nd, respectively. they're all vying for that final 2 seed spot. And so, as of right now, even though Texas Tech has the lowest wins above bubble of that group, if we are saying that Gonzaga gets a high seed based off of their resume, we would also assume that Texas Tech would get the edge as that final 2 seed. That would be the most consistent with the data. Now, if you invert that, if Memphis ends up with a much higher seed than we expect on Selection Sunday, Gonzaga ends up lower in the field than what we are thinking, then that makes the case that perhaps it would be a Kentucky that jumps up and grabs that spot, even a St. John's, depending on how these final few days of the season go. It would apply, of course, to the bubble as well. You could see some of these teams that have better computer numbers, or excuse me, worse in the predictive metrics, but better in the quadrant system, better in the sort of wins above bubble, strength of record type metrics. You could see those teams get the advantage when we come into this. That would be your Indianas. You could see Texas, especially if they can pick up multiple wins. They would fall into that category. Wake Forest as well, another one. So this is the key piece of data that we're going to be looking at as we reflect on what the selection committee does. We'll see how it plays out. As I said, based on yesterday's meeting, based off of what was said, I would lean towards the predictive metrics having at least a slight edge here. I would project that Gonzaga will get a higher seed. I would project that currently Texas Tech would be the team that gets that final 2 seed spot. And I think it's leaning towards a couple of those teams with better computer numbers getting into the field on the bubble. Any inconsistencies there, we will be right back here on Tuesday discussing those. I promise you that. When we come back on the other side, though, we will talk about the bubble. All of those teams, what is their case? What do they have to do over these final couple days before Selection Sunday, right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back into 3 True Values as we keep rolling through the show today. We have to talk about the NCAA tournament bubble. Of course, we're just a couple days away from Selection Sunday, so the field is just about to be set. We are closing in on final decisions about who will be on the right side, who will be on the wrong side. We'll break it all down here on Tuesday. Of course, going through the entire bracket, not just the selection committee's decisions, but also what we will be looking at, the games to watch in that first and second round, the bracket picks that we will be making, and of course the contenders who have the best paths to move through to the next weekend. Right here, though, right now, it is time to talk about these final teams that are on the edge. We'll start with the ones who are they're done. They cannot improve or hurt their resume anymore. They have been knocked out of their conference tournaments, that being West Virginia and Ohio State. You could also include Georgia and Vanderbilt in this category, but I think based on the number of teams on the bubble, based off of where they currently stand, where they were before those losses, I would assume that they are safe in the field. They might slip as low as the last 4 in, but I think it would be on the higher end. It would be in that 11 slot, as we currently have the 11 game and then the 12 game separated, the way that the at-large bids have shaken up with the auto bids. But standing here right now, I think those two teams are pretty safely in. I don't think they have to worry too much on Selection Sunday. On the other hand, West Virginia, they kind of hurt themselves. They're losing to Colorado in their first game in the Big 12 tournament. Colorado, not only is that a team that is ranked below them, a team that is not on the bubble, it's a bad loss. And taking a bad loss this late in the season is going to hurt you. West Virginia was a team that really only had to win that game to feel safe, particularly with Georgia and Vanderbilt losing. They potentially could have been safely on the 10 seed line, not even at risk of falling to 11. So a bad loss for them that could really hurt them on Selection Sunday. I've got them in the last four in right now. I don't think that enough teams could surpass them to knock them out of the field, but they're going to have to sweat it out because, as we know, that last four in is never a guarantee of how they are going to be ranked, where they are going to land, if they will be on the right side of things or slip all the way out of the tournament. The other team that is done and damaged their resume in a big way is Ohio State, who fell in their first game in the Big Ten tournament. Ohio State is a team that I know that some of the metrics still like them, some of the predictive models that we talked about. 40th in the net, 37th still in Kimpom, and 40th in Bartovich. So they're a top 40 team, which would suggest they should probably be in this field. But their overall record is just not good. They're barely above 500 as a team, and not a good conference record. Of course, not a good result in the conference tournament. I just don't see it eye test wise and paper resume, you know, mapping out where their wins are, where their losses are. I just don't see it being enough to match up with some of these teams that are still playing and will be able to pick up even more wins onto their resume. They're in a tough spot because they were already in that last four in category because they had hurt themselves. They had hurt their resume entering the conference tournament. They really needed a win, maybe even two, to feel fully safe for their spot in the tournament. If nothing else, they needed to separate themselves from that 500 record overall. They're just too close to it, I think, to put them in the field. I've got them in the first four out and no opportunity to move up because the teams below them, all of them, Boise State, Colorado State, Wake Forest, Dayton, SMU, UC Irvine, all of them are still playing basketball. They all have chances to improve their resumes further than where it is now. Ohio State does not have that opportunity. The only hope that they have is that if Texas were to lose in grand fashion today, North Carolina is knocked out in ugly fashion in the ACC tournament very quickly. Those would be the only opportunities they really have, I think, to move back up and into the right side of things. But again, there is no guarantee there that that will happen, especially when those teams are playing with their seasons on the line. Both of those teams know. All of these teams know. It is pretty much win or assume that you're going home at this point in the season. So those are the teams that cannot improve their resume. We've touched on a few of these teams that will be playing, but I want to talk a little bit about this North Carolina team because I had them a little bit higher than some others. I had them in the last four buys going into that Duke matchup. I thought that for North Carolina, it was a pretty simple case of why they should be in ahead of some of the other bubble contenders. We saw a lot of these teams were dropping games. Ohio State was dropping games. Texas drops a game. Indiana was pick up a couple wins, drop some games. West Virginia, same thing happening. These teams that are further down the bubble, of course, have all slipped even further from where they were in this conversation just recently. And so, as the only team that was just consistently picking up wins, I felt like North Carolina had the advantage to find their way into the field. Of course, they lose to Duke. That was one of their last opportunities for a quality resume building win to go on to the schedule. But they bounce back. They're headed into the ACC tournament. And now is their chance to capitalize on this Ohio State loss. They were that first team out. Now they've got every opportunity to hold on to a spot in that last four in. It will come down to how deep they can make a run and can they pick up resume building wins. Because here's the catch for if you're North Carolina. You're right there on the cusp. You're one of the last teams. I do think, given your brand, given your history, given the recent run of form that we talk about, I think that they will have some fans in that room who are going to push for them to be in the field. But if Texas makes a deep run, I don't think there's anything you can do short of winning the ACC tournament, which of course would be an auto bid, so you wouldn't even have to worry about it. But short of that, I'm not sure there's anything you can do that can match the potential for what Texas can do. Texas is just playing a tougher schedule in their conference tournament. They are going to pick up multiple quad one wins along the way. they're going to go into this and have to mow through some of the best teams in college basketball if they're going to make a deep run. So if Texas makes a deeper run or even makes it the same distance into the tournament that North Carolina can, the wins that they pick up along the way are just going to be more impressive, more than likely. So it's an interesting spot that North Carolina finds itself in. They are not safe no matter what, but they can definitely help themselves. And as I said, they're one of these teams that the predictive metrics have started to pick back up on. They like them. They have moved up in a lot of those categories into the top 40. So if they can hold on to those positions, they will have a case. We'll see if it's enough once we get to Selection Sunday. We talked about Texas there. That's kind of what they have to do. And what's really fascinating about Texas and their pursuit of reaching the NCAA tournament is that we have discussed for a long time the SEC getting 12, potentially 13 teams in. Because of Oklahoma's win yesterday, I think that they are likely to get into the field. As I said, I think Georgia and Vanderbilt did enough. I think that they are in the field. Arkansas in the field after their win yesterday. So that puts us at 13. And I just said Texas has a better path to pick up more wins than North Carolina for that final spot. So 14 bids into the NCAA tournament is in play. I said it about a month ago, I believe, maybe a little bit less, that it was the first real opportunity where getting 14 bids actually became a viable answer for how many the SEC could get in. And so now, as we reach this point, I'm not going to say it's likely yet, because of course Texas could lose here today, Oklahoma could lose here today, and now we're back to talking about will it be 12 or 13. But if both of those won today, and we see an Indiana, a Xavier, North Carolina lose, one of those happens, it could truly result in the SEC seeing 14 of the 16 members make it into the NCAA tournament. That would be unprecedented. It would shatter the record of 11, and it would pretty much make it to where in the near future, I do not think it would be challenged. I don't think that many conferences would even come close. Perhaps not even the SEC over the next couple of years. We are looking at a historic run for this conference, and it could result in historic results. Will result in historic results. We will see how historic it ends up being once we get to Selection Sunday. And we will have updates to all of this. Bracketology at On3 will be updated throughout the day. After each round of games, I will be updating it. That will be every day. From today, you can go check out published new edition this morning. I will be updating it throughout the night. And then tomorrow, a fresh bracket. And then I will update that throughout the day until we get a fresh bracket the next day. Now, there could be adjustments overnight, of course, with new net numbers, with new wins above bubble numbers. All of that is going to update, and it could shift just a little bit from what my eye test tells me throughout the day. So if you go to bed with your team in one spot and you wake up in a little bit different of a spot, do not panic. It's just the kind of reshuffling that goes on. That will run all the way through Sunday, where I will have my final bracket predictions. We will see the final conference championships go into place, and then we will have Selection Sunday. The bracket will be revealed. I will also have that up as well with plenty of reaction over the course of that night and the next day. So be sure to check out all of that work that I have coming on On3's website. When we come back on the other side, we will wrap up today's show. We'll talk just a little bit about these top seeds, where things stand as we enter conference championship weekend. Welcome back to the final segment of Three True Values as we get you out of here talking about the top of bracketology. I know it's not the most important part of the bracket right now because we're all so focused on what that bubble is going to look like, but it is still important to talk about those top seeds. We'll get more into that, of course, on bracketology, which I mentioned in the last segment. over the weekend, you will see some updates there because some of these teams don't even start playing until tomorrow, particularly those in the Big Ten and the SEC. But we will have some of those teams get started here today. Right now, the 4-1 seeds are still Auburn, Duke, Houston, Florida. That's not going to change until potentially Florida gets knocked out. That would then open the door for Alabama and Tennessee. I do think whichever of those three can make the deepest run in the SEC tournament has the inside track to get that final 1 seed spot. Whether that means winning the conference, which would, I think, get just about any of these teams and potentially Kentucky to that 1 seed line as a conference champion, or if it means getting to the final, even just making it to the semifinal, depending on how the other results go. That's what you're going to want to watch for in the SEC. That's going to play out in seeds 4 through 6. Michigan State pretty safe on the 2 seed line, but here's where things get interesting. And I referenced it earlier in the show, but I'm going to talk about it here. Texas Tech surpasses Kentucky in my bracket for that final 2 seed spot. That does not come from any kind of reshuffling, any change to the resume, of course. Texas Tech will finish with a quad 3 loss on its resume. That was the reason that I had them below Kentucky in the last several editions of bracketology. But after speaking with Bubba Cunningham, the selection committee chair, yesterday, based on the direction of the conversation and the way that different questions were approached, I came away believing that the Net, Kim Palm, Torvik are going to have a slightly stronger impact on how they view some of these teams or how they have discussed some of these teams than perhaps one spot of where they were in the quadrant system. So right now, I'm just giving the edge to Texas Tech. But make no mistake, Kentucky can still get there. I strongly believe that Kentucky can get there with a deep run in the SEC tournament. If they can pick up a win today, pick up a win tomorrow, that is 2 big resume building wins. So if Texas Tech does not match those, look out because there could be a flip there in that process. Iowa State, not out of this either. If Iowa State were to make a run to the conference championship game in the Big 12, or of course, if they won it, I think that would lock them in. If any of these 3 teams can win the conference, I think that would lock them in to that final 2 seed spot. The 3 seeds, like I said, we've got those 2 that are battling, and then I think it's Texas A&M, who, yeah, if they went and won the SEC, I think they'd be in that mix too. St. John's, they've got a case for a 2 seed. There's no doubt about it. I just don't think that enough of the teams above them are going to falter enough to open the door for them to get that high up into this. But if they went and won the Big East title after winning the regular season title, would not rule them out of that at all. The 4 seed line is pretty, I would say, not set in stone, but it looks pretty solid. It would take a team taking an upset loss, I think, to shake things up too much. Maryland and Wisconsin, Purdue. So you got 3 Big Ten teams there. And of course, we know that can impact some of the other seeding as well, because with Illinois also in the mix for a 5 seed, that would not allow the likes of Michigan and Oregon, UCLA even, to push up onto the 5 seed line. Regardless of where they're seeded, they would have to be a 6 seed if they are below those other teams. So it's going to be very fascinating to see how this bracket comes out, because it might not be necessarily with the number of SEC and Big Ten teams in the field. It might not just be seeded 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all 1 seeds, and then so on all the way down through the 16 seeds. It could very well be that we look at this and we say Michigan might have a better resume than Louisville. But Louisville might get the higher spot because Michigan cannot match up in that first weekend with another Big Ten team unless they are out of options. They can move up or down a seed line to make that an option. And so that could very well happen to one or multiple of these teams that we're talking about here in this mix. That is going to be a very interesting storyline that is hard to follow, but we could see play out when we get that final seeding list when things wrap up over the weekend. Like I said before, when we come back here on Tuesday, we will have a full breakdown. Everything that the selection committee did. We will discuss the good and bad of it. We will talk about all of the matchups that have been set for the following weekend. We will make bracket picks. We will talk about the teams with the best path towards the national championship. So be sure to tune in next week on Tuesday, right here on 3 True Values. I'm James Fletcher. Thanks for listening.